have Reggie joining us today is such an honor. Dartmouth grad who's been socially active for years, and I know is going to give us an unbelievable perspective based on his athletic experience and governmental experience. Honored to be joined by Sean Shaw, of course, former state senator who ran for attorney general as well. I know a lot of people on the Zoom voted for him. But when I reached out to Sean, he immediately said yes. And once again, just such an honor to call him friend, to watch him go around the country. He was very active for Mayor Pete, many of you may know, and now, of course, is out there working very hard to make sure the right things happen in November. Eric Range, of course, representing minorities for medical marijuana and many other things, runs an unbelievable Art Basel in Miami. Hopefully that'll come back quickly, Eric, and many other entrepreneurial enterprises. Carlos Guillermo Smith, of course, everybody knows is our sitting state representative from Orlando. I like to call him the progressive lion in the House of Representatives of Florida. Has become a dear friend of mine and was absolutely an early inspiration for me, inviting me up to Orlando to give an early speech in my advocacy. And Carlos being here is, of course, very special. Ruth, I'm going to go ahead and let you introduce Kramer and Ed.
Sure. We also have Ed James III. He is a civic organizer in Sarasota and Manatee County. He brings the past from his renowned father, who passed away a couple of years ago, Ed James Sr., and he and his amazing mother are advocates for the African American community and for minorities as a whole, and he does astounding work for our area, and he's relentless and passionate about what he does and organizing. An amazing person who also ran as a candidate for our commission and for our legislator. We also have Kramer Verde, and I'll actually have Kramer, because I wasn't quite sure, he switched titles recently. So Kramer, I'm going to actually have you introduce yourself, if you can do that. And then after, I don't know if Alan's on yet. Alan Ellison, he switched. And Alan Ellison is running for United States Congress. And I'm not quite sure, I don't remember your district area. You can actually, Alan, you can talk about that, but it's Greg Stubbe territory, I know that. And you handle multiple of counties and also relentless worker. I think everyone on the panel today is a civic leader, also fighting for justice on a daily basis for everyone. So I'm honored as well to be a moderator on this panel. And Kramer, if you and Alan, and actually Ed, if you guys can just do like a 30-second quick bio on yourselves, I'll let you do that, because you speak better about yourselves than I ever will.
Ruda, thank you. Dr. Berry, thank you for having me here, and thank you for everyone to being on this very important topic that we're going to discuss. My name is Kramer Verde. I live in Sarasota County. I used to be the past state president for the Hispanic Caucus. I served with the ACLU in the local and the state board, and currently I'm the political director of LULAC Florida. LULAC is a 90-year-old organization. We are the League of United Latin American Citizens, very strong and East Coast. We're growing here on this side now. In the West Coast, sorry. We're growing on the East Coast and trying to advocate for more involvement of the Hispanic community, and of course, trying to increase voter participation. Thank you.
Fantastic. Ed, are you with us?
I am. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on this awesome conversation. I am Ed James. I am a political consultant. I work on both electoral campaigns as well as issue campaigns. And primarily what I've been focusing on lately is addressing the inequities as it relates to marijuana in our state and here locally in Sarasota. African Americans are actually 10 times more likely to be arrested for possession of marijuana than their white counterparts. And moreover, in Sarasota, marijuana is decriminalized criminalized within the city, but it is still a major criminal issue in the county. So trying to work on some parity there, and also working on creating a pipeline of consultants and education as it relates to helping African Americans better understand the process of attaining a medical marijuana treatment center license.
Fantastic.
And Alan?
Alan? Not yet?
Not yet. So
All right,
go ahead, Barry.
So Carlos, welcome and thank you so much for joining us as our current sitting representative. I'm going to go ahead and let you start off and just go ahead and just give us your general perspective on what's been going on over the past few weeks and of course events leading up to.
Thank you, Dr. Barry, for having me. For those who don't know, my name is Carlos Guillermo Smith. I'm a state representative. I represent East Orlando, House District 49 in the Florida House of Representatives. And as far as the last few weeks, I just want to send my solidarity to the Black and African American community. We recently joined in the demonstrations in downtown Orlando to protest the killing of George Floyd, and obviously in opposition to the institutional racism that we just continue to see across the country. Obviously, that manifests itself, institutional racism, in so many different ways, whether it be through police brutality, whether it be through discrimination, and of course, as we know, as advocates for so many causes, but specifically for cannabis reform in Florida's cannabis program. I would like to defer to other voices as far as really being able to talk about where we are as a country right now. But I think the dialogue is important, but the dialogue is just the beginning. The action is what we really need to see as a result of so much of this action as it relates to pushing back on institutional racism, being able to implement very, very important reforms to prohibit police brutality, to make sure that law enforcement is held accountable, but also taking a hard look at so many other institutions separate from law enforcement to make sure that we are eradicating these inequities, and we are making sure that we're really living up to the constitutional principles of this great country. I think that other folks will probably have much more articulate ways of being able to encapsulate where we are right now. And I think that my role is to try to lift up other voices, of course, especially Black voices, to really be the ones talking. I was given one mouth but two ears, so I'm here to listen.
Me too, Carlos. And that was my intention, was to provide a forum really where we can listen. And Sean, I want to lead right into you because of your vast experience, both as an attorney, of course. What people don't know about Sean, or maybe you do, of course, his father was the first and only, right, Black Chief Supreme Court Justice here in Florida. So Sean, I can only imagine the stories that you heard growing up to the extent of in your home and your dad's vast experience and the things that you saw.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Dr. Barry. I'm happy to be on here. I'm seeing some other fellow Black men on this panel, and they're going to know what I'm going to say right now. We have all had the talk with our either father or someone about how to act with police. And that is a unique conversation that no other subset has in the same way we have. And the only difference in my life was my dad gave me that talk in a three-piece suit when he happened to be the Chief Justice of the Florida Supreme Court. And I say that to tell you, it doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter who your parents are, doesn't matter where you went to college, doesn't matter if I'm a lawyer or ran for Attorney General, was a member of the House. All that matters right now, the most important thing about me is that I'm a Black man, and that the knot in the pit of my stomach is the same knot that every other Black man has when we begin to interact with police. And that is something that has existed since before Jim Crow, and it exists now. And
Yeah.
that is what is behind what's going on in this country. Anything else is a red herring. Anything else is fluff. Anything else is to take away from that hard topic. And it's a hard topic. I understand that. This is not easy to start delving into the actions of those that we have entrusted with our safety. And I understand that. But if we do not have it and we don't do something, then it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And quite frankly, obviously, I think we'll all agree on here that we like lawful protest. But let me say this: what do you expect people to do at a certain point? At a certain point of not being listened to, at a certain point of kneeling, praying, marching, lighting candles, if everything you're told is wrong and nothing changes, then I'm not very surprised about what we're seeing currently in our country. And when you have someone at the very top, I won't get political, Dr. Berry, but I will. When you have someone at the
You're
very
allowed,
top,
you're allowed in this forum.
the
Sean.
gasoline,
You have to.
as Congresswoman Val Deming said, the gasoline that the president is throwing on this fire is making it much worse. And so I am somewhat heartened by how many people are participating in the protest, but I'm not heartened because I'm still not seeing the nexus between protest and policy change. So if you're a mayor of any city in America and the only conversation you have with your police chief was how to deal with protests, and you haven't spoken to your police chief about how to make sure your police department doesn't engage in these sort of tactics, then shame on you. If that's the only conversation you're having with your police chief, then we need different politicians. I don't care if you're white, black, Democrat, or Republican. Quite frankly, I've seen problematic actions and statements from politicians of both sides and all colors. I don't want it. Let me say this. If you didn't have a statement about the killing of George Floyd and you issued a statement on protests and rioters, shame on you. Shame on you. In this state, it appears, not in this state, but it certainly appears there's a segment of people who believe looting and unlawful protests are more important than the unlawful killing of Black men in police custody. So we got a lot to do, and there's all these policies that are out there. We don't need a town hall or a professor or some sort of vigil to tell us what the policies are. There's 20 to 30 things every police department can do. Those things are out there, and quite frankly, that's what we need to be working on going forward. Thanks.
Fantastic. Alan, I see, has joined us. Ruta, why don't you go ahead and introduce Alan to the crowd?
Sure. Alan, actually, I'm just going to have you introduce yourself. You're running for United States Congress, and give us a little bio on yourself, about 30 seconds long.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alan Ellison. I'm running for the United States House of Representatives to represent Florida's 17th District. My district is the largest congressional district in the state. It covers 9 counties, and I'm the returning Democratic nominee from 2018. And I am unopposed in this election, and just looking to raise the awareness on cannabis, raise the awareness on the criminal justice system, injustices in America, race relations, and just really be able to help people come together on the common threads that bind us together.
Thanks, Alan. So honored to have you join us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Been a while since I've seen you. So Kelly, I wanted to bring you in, of course, to give your perspective once again from all the different sides that you bring it from.
Well, I tell you, Barry, I thought about this a lot when you asked me. I was born in 1965 during the Watts riots. One thing you probably don't know about me, my grandfather was one of the first Black civil rights attorneys in Nashville, Tennessee. He went to school with Thurgood Marshall. And he was involved in those SNCC sit-ins at Fisk University. He was involved in representing those students that did the sit-ins. So all of my life, it's been, and my father is an attorney and my uncle were attorneys. And so all of my life, we have had this race conversation. Fast forward, I was my first year at Howard University in 1982. And we marched on Washington commemorating Martin Luther King's March on Washington 20 years prior. Fast forward to that, I was a school teacher in Los Angeles during the King riots. In my school, I was in South Central LA. This was before medical school. After that, I said medical school has to be a whole lot easier than this. But I was a school teacher in South Central Los Angeles, and my school was the first to get shut down during that. I remember that night of the King riots when those police officers were acquitted. And what strikes me is a great sense of sadness that 50 years of my life and the conversation that I'm going to have with my young son who's 9 years old, and the conversation that Mr. Shaw just talked about having with that he's had with his kids, I'm going to have with my son. About what to do when you get stopped by a police officer. Why, after all of this time, are we still having these conversations? Why are we still having these conversations about medical cannabis, for that matter, about marijuana, for that matter? Why are we still having these conversations that we keep having that don't change, that don't change at all? Action is what needs to happen right now. Action and stronger leadership, quite frankly. I mean, we can't have this conversation without talking about the divisiveness that's going on in the United States from the top down, quite frankly. And I know there's plenty of forums that will talk about the guy in the White House, but that has got to change. I mean, so this is an election year. This is the year of a pandemic. I can definitely see why this has just turned into a powder keg. I mean, these are people that have been not only disenfranchised, they don't have jobs, unemployment is at an all-time high. We're in the middle of a pandemic, so these people are literally risking their lives to be out and demonstrating for what they believe what we believe so deeply in. And so it's coming to a head. We have to be able to vote. We have to be able to get to stop the voter suppression and to have everybody out there that is eligible to vote out there doing it. And so.
For sure. I mean, the voter suppression issue, Kelly, is one of the later questions. And I know Carlos and I know Sean also will have a whole lot to say about that because of Amendment 4. Of course, which passed, which has been completely, not appropriately taken care of. I was struck by Reverend Al's comments yesterday that for every time there's a season and every season there's a time. This is 2020. That's what I tell my patients about cannabis reform right now. I can't be 1980 Dr. Nancy Reagan, just say, no, this is your brain on drugs in 2020. And I like to say the same thing about what's going on today with the social injustice. Everything's on the cell phone now. Everything is visual and we see it and they can't hide this anymore. So this is the time when we have to take action because it's right in front of our eyes. Reggie, you got the gray hairs. I'm going to bring you in. Why don't you give us a little bit of your impression of what you've seen through the years? And of course, you can bring athletics into it however you care to. But once again, I'd love to hear your perspective on where we're at right now.
Just to build on Sean's and Kelly's statement, I was born in 1954, the year of the Brown versus Board of Education decision. I've always seen my life as a yardstick of progress through education. And obviously, right now, as a Dartmouth College grad, which was also a coincidence because the Ivy League was formed in 1954. Since the beginning of the Ivy League, there's only been one African-American that has played football that was also an All-American. It's in the College Football Hall of Fame. That's me. And I'm proud of that because I'm also half Puerto Rican and I started my life at Michigan School for the Deaf and Dumb. And the reason is education is critical. Right now, I'm an owner of stock in a cannabis company in California. It was Pure Ratios. I'm a big advocate there as an endorser, and Pure Ratios is now owned by Forefront. and they're pretty progressive in trying to bring more African Americans into the cannabis industry at every single level. And I've always learned, especially since, I'm the guy that built Disney's Wide World of Sports, which is now ESPN Wide World of Sports, is where the NBA and probably Major League Soccer will begin sports. That just shows you that, there are African Americans who've been involved in unique positions of influence that are coming to fruition. And it now needs to happen by eliminating the stigma of cannabis for all individuals, but especially in the African American community. We have been stigmatized, we have been arrested, we have been prosecuted, and our community has been decimated. And so I think time has been overviewed to include this issue, which has been a foot that the NFL has put on the players, unique to the other sports. The NBA is not as hard on their players, nor Major League Baseball as an institution are not as hard on their players. But even in this latest collective bargaining agreement, the NFL had to relinquish that control that they've used on players' rights.
Thank you so much, Reggie. Absolutely. And I think the country, and it's stupid, but it's led by the athletes, the actors, those that are socially, that's just the knee-jerk nature of society. Eric, I'm going to come down to you on that because, hearing that Reggie has been able to get his way into the cannabis world as an entrepreneur, I know is something that I know you could speak to. And that's, I think, a real important part of today's session is talking about what's going on in the cannabis community to the extent of some of the inequalities and the difficulties of, people of color getting involved in the cannabis space from a business side.
Yeah. Again, thank you for the platform. Thank you to everyone who's already spoken. You guys, you speak with such authority. It's hard to come behind you guys, but a couple of thoughts that I have right off. I've been asked with some of my posts that I put out in the last couple of weeks, what does all of this have to do with the cannabis industry? And I have to remind people that you cannot have a conversation about criminal justice reform without having the conversation about medical marijuana, without adult use, without cannabis reform. Because when you think about all of, there was a report put out almost a decade ago now, where over half the arrests in this country are drug related. And over half of those arrests have a charge with marijuana involved. And of course, disproportionately, African-American and Hispanic communities bear the brunt of that. So again, we cannot talk about, criminal justice reform without talking about cannabis reform at the same time. And so, I'm very glad to have this conversation here because I think there are so many different cross sections. I think the cannabis industry has a responsibility to lead. If you are a cannabis business and you have a business in this space, you should be out front speaking up. You should be the ones leading the charge when we talk about expungements and restoring the rights of those who've been incarcerated for this. You have a responsibility to be a good steward of this industry. And, I know we're going to get into some more questions, and I want to make sure I leave time for everyone else to talk because I could talk for a while. But, over the last couple of weeks, one of the things that has that I've done, and this has brought a little relief to me, is to go back and listen to some of our leaders from the past. Everybody, I see all kind of MLK quotes. I've even seen some, Huey P. Newton quotes, some Malcolm X quotes. But my hero is James Baldwin. And I think about a speech, I think it was in 1976, he did a debate with William F. Buckley at Cambridge University in England. And he ended his speech saying this, and I'll say this and then I'll be quiet. He said that until America realizes that Blacks are not wards of the state, we are not, your charity cases, but we are a part of the very people who built this country, the American dream is scarcely attainable. Because by the very definition of those people who exist in the system, who are unable to attain the promise of the system, we threaten it and we will destroy it. And I think that's what we see right now in the streets. People are fed up when you don't have a way to voice that concern and be heard. You act out. We see it in our kids. I have a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old. When I'm not listening to them truly, they do something to get my attention. And I think that's what we see right now. I think one of the things we are missing is that, during the 60s, you had organizations like SNCC and others that were there to train people on how to protest peacefully. Those organizations no longer exist. And so people know that protests work and they get out, and, it can go in many different ways. We have to find ways to begin to re-educate people about civics, about how to protest, how to use their voice in everyday life in order to stand up for injustice.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Eric, because you're right. I think, how to protest peacefully, how to gather, how to organize. I'll tell you, I was struck also, and I want to give a shout out, of course, to the veterans. Today is D-Day, of course, memorial. And I was struck by the scene at the American Cemetery over Omaha Beach. Those were all Americans, white Americans, Black Americans, yellow Americans, Jewish Americans, Catholic Americans. They were all Americans. Yes. And I think, once again, that's what we all have to focus on. Ruta and I have discussed this. It's the labeling of all of us that seems to get into the way. It's time to get rid of the labels. We're all Americans. We should all live in peace.
I think that's part of our, as a country, I think that's part of one of our issues is the fact that we label people. My husband happens to come from Morocco. He's African American. And he was dumbfounded when he came to the United States that people are labeled by color. And it's something that starts when they're children, and it's something that shouldn't happen. And it's something that we need to indoctrinate from youth, because ultimately parents are teaching their children racism, and it's something that has to start from childhood. But I want to just ask Kramer, because one of the things that I was reading the other day is there's a rise on female Hispanics getting arrested for possession of marijuana. It's on the rise, and statistically higher than men, Hispanic men. And I wanted, Kramer, can you address a little bit of what's going on in the Hispanic community and why they're targeting female Hispanics for minor possession, you think?
I mean, there is always the stereotype and the bias that it was always after the African American and Hispanic individuals for possession. I guess before it was targeted mainly on the male side. Now they're actually, because that was happening, females, I guess, are the ones who are more involved in the possession of it. I believe also that it's not necessarily just because of what they're doing, but also the empowerment that women are having. Women as men are entitled to do whatever they want. And these recent years, we have seen a lot of change. And actually, I would like to say that we have seen a lot of female leadership increase in all aspects of, in this nation, from representatives or activists. Specifically, I don't know why police now is targeting women, but I will say that it shouldn't be a case just to be targeting our groups, having us as minorities just following this stereotype that. Yes.
I'm sorry, no, I'm wondering, and this is something I'd like to address with the whole panel. Do you think, obviously for African-American men, they want to suppress the votes. There's no question. And they want minor possession, and they want to incarcerate so that they lose their right to vote. Do you think that the Hispanic women perhaps are gaining strength, and perhaps it's a voting bloc, and maybe that their underlying issue is they want to suppress female Hispanics from voting ultimately?
Honestly, that might be you might be right, because in any political campaign that I was involved recently, we were targeting females, and specifically female Hispanics, because as member of a family, the female has a lot of saying in what needs to be done. And not necessarily just in voting, but even on situations related to what, they look after the household. So if something needs to be done, is the female actually pushing the husband to do certain things. And of course, the female will be a big influencer in a family that's allowed to vote to actually do that. On the same token, actually, I see females more involved.
In my house, yes, dear, okay? Those are the two most important words that my grandfather ever taught me.
I mean, yes, happy wife, happy life. And, you know, sometimes that's how it goes on a lot of issues, not necessarily as on family gatherings or situations, but also as on voting. And now that we're having these protests, I see a lot of female leadership out there, and that's great. Like they were saying before, we just need to be careful, and, you know, there needs to be a way on how to protest so these protests can be productive. And I hope that everyone that's protesting also engage in voting, because yes, we can go protest, demand, have dialogues and talk, but if we don't put the right people in the right positions to make actual change that will affect the laws and policies that we need in place so we can actually restructure this systematic problem that we're having, we're not going to see anything changing other than just protesting and sadly see this violence against, you know, police enforcement and the protesters that I think it will not lead us to anything.
Listen, Kramer,
Hi everyone. This is Ed. If I can just hop in real quick, because I too live in Sarasota County with both Ruta and Kramer, and I'm a 30-year-old African American male. I just turned 30 recently, and one of the things that I've been seeing on the front lines as we've been marching and protesting is a call to, because I'm all about action items and dealing directly with policy, right? And so one of the things that we're very concerned about, particularly being young Black men, is the fact that, you know, in the state of Florida, if you get a cannabis card, you then give up your right to concealed carry. Now, obviously, what we're hearing around the country is, oh, this was an unarmed Black man and he was shot because he was an unarmed Black man. But guess what? If I have a concealed carry permit and I'm shot and killed and they say that I'm armed, that doesn't make me any less of a good person, because under the law, I have the right to carry a gun. And so I want to address that. And I think that it is very important, because I think that's something that we're skipping over, because in our quest to, you know, quell white fear and show that we're not violent, we're also giving up our right to protect our families. And I think that's something that I want to address. So
I think, and I agree, I think it is an important topic, and I think it's something that I think our country as a whole overlooks, because one of the things that struck me, Sean, you had said it earlier about, you know, how much peaceful protesting can you actually do, and what is the ultimate achievement of it. Because a lot of people are quoting Dr. Martin Luther King, and they said, well, he never, you know, took up arms, he never did this, he never did that, and look at the change he did. But here we are in 2020 with the same conversation that he had. And so my question, and Alan, you're running for U.S. Congress, is how do we progress as a country? I mean, we're still here in 2020 having a race discussion. How do you foresee doing any kind of political change in Washington and on a local level to make a movement, a true movement? Because I also think people are sick and fed up. How do you see going forward?
Well, I see political movement first starting with the cultural movement, and really just building a coalition of people that are on the same page. And once they're on the same page, then we have to have actionable steps. So one of the things that I'm going to be proposing today is to encourage more Black and brown individuals to consider running for office, to consider going into law, becoming judges, and even getting in law enforcement. Because if you don't have a seat at the table, you can't really expect those who are at the table to represent your interests. And so all of the things that we're talking about, we need like-minded individuals to hold positions of power, just like what they did in Ferguson, where they controlled over 70% of the population. But for years, no one was involved in any law enforcement at leadership levels. No one was involved at the mayoral races, the county commissioner races, the city commissioner races. When I pushed for them to engage in political action, they did so. And now you see Ferguson now has the first Black mayor, female mayor. They have a Black police chief now. They have Black city council members. And so this is how we are able to move forward in this country, we have to get involved. We have to socially engage in political action, and it has to become the new path forward, because all of the marching, all of the protests, it has its place, and it's to bring about awareness. But once we have the awareness, then what? And so today I'm going to be, or later today, I'm going to be speaking at a Black Lives Matter movement, and we're going to unveil our 9-minute campaign. And the campaign is basically taking up 9 minutes to register to vote, taking up 9 minutes to request vote by mail ballots. And actually, when it comes time to do it, take 9 minutes to actually vote, and get people to run for offices at every level, from U.S. Congress, State House, county commissioners, city commissioners, mayor, school boards. We need more people to step up and get involved, and that's how we change the game.
Can I say something?
Yeah, Sean, I was going to come to you because you had the opportunity to go around the country when you were working with and for Mayor Pete. What were you seeing out there? What can get people really motivated right now?
I mean, voting is important. I'm not here to say it's not important, but I think it's more than that. Particularly these young people, in Orlando, Tampa, and St. Pete, all the mayors are Democrats. The police have tear gassed and shot people with rubber bullets. Now, I ain't trying to start nothing, but I want you to think about that. Now, this is bigger than that. It's bigger than even just, we got to vote, and that's important. But I would venture to say we need to do, not only we need to vote, but we need to particularly, I'm here in Tampa, and our mayor is a former police chief, and she's a great person, she's a great friend of mine, but there are still things the Tampa Police Department needs to do to make sure that they're acting how they need to act. And so ain't no amount of prayers and vigils and meetings going to change the fact that the Tampa Police Department hasn't engaged in enough to prevent what happened to George Floyd from happening. So that's one. And two, these Dr. King quotes, I just got to talk about it because it upsets me greatly, right? And I know Reggie is going to agree with this, since you already called him out for having gray in his beard. I didn't do it. You did it, Dr. Berry. But Dr. King was one of the most reviled Americans at the time of his assassination. This Disney version that particularly white America tries to push of Dr. King is unfair to his legacy. It is unfair to the work of the civil rights movement. It is unfair to Abernathy. It is unfair to everybody who's associated with Dr. King. Dr. King had upset Black people. He had upset white people, and everyone was mad at him when he was assassinated. And now here we are pretending that I have a dream and the mountaintop encapsulates the legacy of Dr. King. It does not. Economic equality, justice, those types of things are what encapsulates Dr. King's legacy. The fact that America has never lived up to the promise that is in the Constitution, that is Dr. King's legacy. And that is the thing that we have never gotten close to achieving in this country, regardless of how many Black History Month programs we have, where little boys quote Dr. King's "I Have a Dream" speech on the corporate stage. That's one of the ultimate problems.
If I could jump in as well, as a younger African-American, one of the things that upsets me most is that right now, in most of the conversations that we have, and again, I think is important, and I don't think it's entirely wrong, but the onus is put on the Black community to change. We are the victims here. We are not the ones who are perpetrating this, but yet everyone is looking to us to change. And I agree, we do have to step up. We do have to vote. We do have to participate in politics. We have to hold our politicians accountable. Even when we're not in office, we have to do all of those things. But what about the rest of America? What about the rest of the people who are, you're in a position of privilege, a position of power or influence? What are you supposed to be doing right now? And that's what my conversation has been about over the last couple of weeks, is helping people outside of my community understand what we need you to do. If you own a business, you're a CEO, I need you right now to take a look at your board. Is your board reflective of of diversity, of society? Is your leadership reflective of that? How can you ensure that your organization isn't perpetuating racism if you don't have people on the board who can speak to that? If you don't have people on your organization who is a part of your decision-making process that can help you guide through these different things. Just putting out a statement is not enough. What does your internal policies look like? How are your wages wage discrimination inside your organization? Are men paid higher than women? Are Blacks able to get the same type of, these are the things that the rest of the country has to do. It can't just be about politics, because we've legislated before, but the way our politics works is that we have two different parties. So when one party is in, we can put laws in, and when the next party comes in, they can take laws out. So we have to, at every level, as individuals, do what we can, and we cannot just sit and wait on government to fix the problem, because this isn't just a government problem. This is people who don't see other Americans as humans. This is people who are doing this in everyday life. Yeah, we're here because someone was killed at the hands of police officers, but just weeks prior, someone was killed at the hands of another citizen, okay? So we have to address these problems at every level. And everybody has in my opinion, a responsibility to do something, not just our government officials, which right now, again, we are seeing a lack of leadership across the board. But that means that we as Americans have to be the ones, the catalyst of change in our communities and in our workplaces and everywhere that we have influence and power.
I agree. And if I could just jump in there, I think that we have to learn from our past mistakes as well. I've always thought that when we integrated school systems, for example, and this is just an example, but when we have people coming in to our schools, and we had Black people integrating into the schools, it was not with a spirit of we need to learn mutually about what this African American is. It was, you sit back there, you either assimilate to what we're doing or you are going to be ostracized. And we have to change that dynamic. And you're right, Eric, we have to make sure that we are all taking responsibility for this. It's not just Black, brown, minority, whites. It's not, we all have to take responsibility and be an active voice in learning more about what we don't know about. So for example, the police, the police men and the police officers, they should have more classes. They should have more classes on racial equality. What does that mean? To not use some of the things that they were using and they have been using on citizens.
So Carlos, do we have any hope at any Florida state legislative level of having any impact at all on any of these issues, or is this going to have to be much more so grassroots?
But you still haven't even mentioned gun rights. I mean, that's the key issue right now. The one difference now is that we don't have the Black Panthers. I mean,
believe it or not,
Black Panthers really were a opposite of Martin Luther King. That's why people want to remember Martin Luther King, but they don't want to remember,
Right.
you know, the Black Panthers.
Right.
Yeah, and getting back to Ed's point,
This is Ed. This is Ed, and I have to jump in. I get really pissed off when we try to juxtapose MLK and the Black Panther Party and say that they're absolute opposites. Because again, this is the whitewashing.
They work together.
And this is the whitewashing of the
work
legacy.
together.
Because the fact of the matter is they did work together. And Fred Hampton Jr., who was 21 when he was assassinated by the FBI, actually preached love and not hate. And one of the things that the Black Panther Party did was they're the Black Panther Party for protection, and they were working with poor white people from Appalachia, Native Americans. They were working together to actually build a multiracial coalition. So their dreams were actually not very, very far apart. And in terms of gun rights, I think, again, we do need to address that, because I mentioned that and it was kind of glossed over. Again, if you are an African American or anyone in the state of Florida and you actually have an ailment and you decide to get a cannabis card, you're giving up your right to protect your family. And that is something that we are not talking about.
You can still have your concealed carry card and have your medical cannabis card, correct, Mary?
You can't purchase. No, you cannot. I have a concealed weapon permit. You cannot.
I agree. I can't do it.
You can't do it. Yeah, you will, unless you go like to a private owner for a gun.
But you can have your concealed carry card and you can have your medical cannabis card. You can't purchase new guns while you have your concealed carry card.
And Ed, just to reinforce what you're saying, it is the most common question that we get in the clinic. The most common question. And it stops many people from getting their medical cannabis cards. And it's been astounding to me how frequently that comes up. And I very much appreciate your perspective on it.
They can't come and get your guns. If you already own guns, they cannot come and get your guns.
Yes, they can. They have the ability to do that.
They don't.
They do have the ability to come get your guns.
So if you have your concealed carry card and you have your medical cannabis card, when has that happened? What instances has that happened in?
The fact is, it hasn't happened yet. And we do tell our patients that uniquely Nikki Fried, who kind of controls concealed carry in Florida, she does have both. And it's well known that she has both. So I'm not hip at betraying anything. So,
yeah.
But Ed, getting back to your point, it is the most frequent thing that we hear in our clinic that stops people from getting their cards.
Thanks, Doc. I appreciate it.
No, and I wonder going forward, like this is something else. I mean, like if you think about it, is it suppression? And obviously it is, because they don't want people to have weapons. Obviously some people, not all people. And I think, again, it goes back to the systematic suppression, whether it's voter suppression, gun suppression. And one of the things I also wanted to address, and I would like to ask the panel too, one of the barriers that I see for even the African-American community or Hispanic, a lot of times has to do with the cost of obtaining a medical marijuana card. So a lot of times it's a tremendous burden on somebody that they can't afford it. So the lower income populations are being punished, and they get caught and get minor possession, and then they can't get the housing, and they can't get the jobs, and they can't, and we put them into this vicious circle that is never ending, which is ridiculous. And I just want to see like your thoughts on that for the whole panel, I guess.
Yeah, Ruda. So here's the issue. I'm really glad that you brought up affordability as it relates to the legal medical cannabis program that we have. The simple answer is that to be a legal medical cannabis patient in Florida is very expensive. The ID that is required is $75 annually. If you're a caregiver, that also applies to you. You have to have an ID as a caregiver, and the patient has to have an ID. So if that's the case for you, that's a double whammy. On top of that, because cannabis is illegal at the federal level, you can't rely on traditional insurance benefits to cover things like copays to a doctor visit, or even a copay for your medication, which is the cannabis. So you're looking at $200 to $300 is the average for a doctor visitation to get your consultation for medical cannabis. That has to be paid. That has to be paid out of your own pocket because insurance does not cover that. And then plus, if you finally get that far through the process, you get your cannabis recommendation, you get your ID, and you go to a dispensary, the product is expensive and you must pay in cash. And it's not like your regular prescription that you go to CVS and you pay a few dollars is your copay based on your plan. No, 100% is on the patient. And when you think about what are the qualifying medical conditions that exist in the Constitution and the different types of ailments that people have that qualify them for medical cannabis, you realize, wait a minute, a lot of these medical conditions are for people who are on disability, people who are Medicaid recipients. They are by definition low income. They are on a set income. And so all of these costs and barriers, at the end of the day, for many, it just pushes those legitimate medical cannabis customers back onto the illicit market. Why? Because it's easier to get cannabis on the illicit market and it's cheaper. And the risk that comes with using cannabis on the illicit market, because there is risk, is a risk that many patients are willing to take because it's just cost prohibitive to be a legal medical cannabis patient. So what are we doing to solve that? Well, we're working on many different solutions. I've introduced legislation for several sessions to either eliminate or reduce the cost of the ID, to offer sliding scale rates for the medical cannabis ID, also perhaps for veterans or Medicaid recipients. And then also, of course, we just have to reform the whole system and not have a vertically integrated system that, of course, creates the cartel like program that we all know about. More competition drives down the cost. And so, my goodness, there's so many things, but that cost prohibitive just kind of way that this program is set up, unfortunately, directly impacts minorities who are more likely to just continue getting products from the illicit market.
Great answer. Thank you. And thank you, by the way, for all the legislation that you do and that you bring up constantly. And you're such a defender. So thank you so much for doing that.
Of course.
So believe it or not, we only have like 8 minutes left or something like that. We could obviously talk for hours. So I'm just going to open up the floor for everybody to just kind of wrap things up. Here's my point. I want this to be the start, and I want it to be a continued conversation. And I thank everybody so much for the information and the knowledge that I've gained out of this. And, you know, Eric, once again, thank you for initially giving me the knock. In the Leafly article that Kelly posted this morning, there were some great suggestions on where people can donate to, including Minorities for Medical Marijuana, Eric's organization, and others. But my point is, I want to shut up and listen to everybody else suggest where we can go from here and what we can do. I surely would love to sit on a task force to bring more diversity, more social justice, things of that nature, both within and not within the cannabis community. So my point is, let's make this a start and an effort. And once again, make 2020 the year where we can really make some progress and impact.
So maybe we can do a quick roundtable of last thoughts by all of our great panelists on what they see going forward, maybe like a minute each, and do a wrap up. And then maybe, like I said, going forward, it would be nice to do something where we do make a change and make progress. So should we start with, want to go around, do a round robin quickly for last thoughts?
Sounds great.
Sure. I think we all have a responsibility. We all have to now look at what we're doing both locally as well as nationally. What I'm doing with my clinic. You know, who am I? Who am I hiring?
Give yourself a plug, Kelly. Relief Clinic up in Brandon, one of the best.
MD Clinic, yes, yeah. Relief MD. I've been now in business now for the last 2.5 years since this began. I'm probably one of 2 African American women that own their own clinic as a solo practice in the state of Florida, and it's been a journey. It has been a ride, and I think, if we own our own clinic and if we own our own economics just as a community, we are able to make decisions that big corporations can't make. And so that gives us a great opportunity to really make some changes at the grassroots level. So I think that's, for me, that's my challenge, and that's what I will be starting to do.
Kramer, you want to? Mm-hmm. Kramer, you want to go?
Reggie?
Or Reggie?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, what I would like to say is that yes, we need to look for legalization,
yes,
but also decriminalization of possession. In the case of the young individuals that are in a process of adjusting their status, that can stop any future for them, and it's very complicated. And people that are very productive, great minds, so they can be a really good element for society here and contribute in our country, might stop them from actually achieving all this. So yes, I believe this is a great start, Dr. Berry. I appreciate being part of this conversation, and I look forward for more.
Well, the only thing that I would say that hasn't been involved in any of this dialogue has been solutions on the current movement that is facing all of America, of which, you know, cannabis is a subset, which we've been discussing. And the one thing that I would look towards is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that Reverend Bishop Desmond Tutu did in South Africa. that really address all of the systemic issue and actually put everything out in the public. We in America have never really examined, our original sins, and therefore will never address resolutions of this original sin of slavery.
Very good point. Very good point. Eric, you want to be up next?
Sure. I guess my final thoughts are more of a challenge to everybody, to businesses, to individuals, folks in the cannabis space, elected officials, those running for office. Take a look at the influence you have, the privilege you have, and leverage that to advance the conversation, to advance solutions. We all have to do something. We all have to be a part of the change that we want to see. Right now, our country is hurting as a whole. The great American experiment is right now at jeopardy. And the only way we pull that back is for us all to do what we can in whatever spaces we exist to bring it back, to make sure that everyone, all citizens are able to fully participate in this thing we call the American dream. Because if we don't, again, I'll quote James Baldwin, by our very existence in a system that we can not access, we threaten that system. And so my challenge is just to everybody to do what you can in the space that you can, but do more than conversations. Take action, talk to your people, ask for help. If you don't know, and a lot of people genuinely don't know what to do, but there are good groups out there. Of course, I'll shout out Minorities for Medical Marijuana and all of the work that we're doing. If you're in the cannabis space and you're trying to figure out what you can do now, reach out to us. We're here. We'd love to be able to help you with that.
And we'll put up links later on our website also. So for anyone that has suggestions or ideas as we go forward, please let us know, because we'd be more than happy to share links for your organizations for sure. Ed, would you like to go up next?
Sure. Thank you again for organizing this, everyone. I just, again, want to reiterate that as we talk about the protection of Black and brown bodies, it is absolutely imperative. And Carlos, I'll put the onus on you, my brother, because you are a Florida representative, to really challenge the laws right now that make it prohibitive for individuals who want to have cannabis cards for their ailments and their illnesses to not be able to, unfortunately, under this current system, they're not able to protect themselves and their families. And I think that overwhelmingly impacts communities of color. And I'd like to see that addressed. And then additionally, I'm a very local guy, so I'm thinking here in Sarasota, but I know that it exists statewide. In all the cities and counties where medical marijuana is decriminalized, we need to go back and wipe the records clean of those individuals who have been convicted of possession, of minor possession.
Yes.
Here in Sarasota County, that's 28 grams or less. So appreciate the work that y'all are doing. Let's make legislation a priority. And Carlos, hats off to you for the amazing work you're doing in the Florida House of Representatives.
Carlos, since you got the hats off, let's go to you next.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Ruta. Well, look, there's so many things that we all can be working on, and if we're talking about policy-based solutions beyond dialogue, reforming the cannabis system in Florida has a direct impact on being able to push back on institutional racism. Even if we were going to reform just the medical cannabis program, although we need to do much more. Adding a qualifying condition such as sickle cell is something that can open up the medical cannabis program, certainly to more Black and African American Floridians. We need to allow small businesses in and let those minority-owned businesses be able to be a part of the industry that has obviously for generations disproportionately and negatively impacted their communities as well. We need to be able to not disqualify people from working in the cannabis industry who have past convictions related to marijuana possession. Even if we just decriminalize cannabis possession, the most recent data that we have tells us that in 2017, 42,153 people in Florida were arrested for misdemeanor level cannabis possession. And of course, 42% of those who were arrested are Black. So we know that it's disproportionate based on race in the state of Florida. And when we talk about so many of the police reforms that's on the top of people's minds, we have to remember that actually the governments that are closest to the people are the ones that are going to have the most direct impact over these policies. We're talking about your county commissioners, your city council persons who have oversight over these law enforcement agencies that can make so many of these direct changes. That's why President Obama talked about so many of the solutions that he's recommending to the mayors, not Congress, but the mayors, because they are the ones that are implementing this. You know, there needs to be more de-escalation training. There needs to be reform on the use of force. Chokeholds should be banned. You know, there needs to be more racial bias training. There needs to be more police oversight boards, and not just the police oversight boards led by citizens that are for show, that only respond to the investigations that law enforcement themselves puts out there, but ones that actually follow an investigation focused models led by those oversight boards. We have to end the criminalization of poverty. My goodness, the list goes on and on and on of things that can be done. And while the talking continues, the action has to be taken place.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carlos. Alan, can you give us your perspective, and then we'll wrap it up with Sean?
Yes, thank you very much. And I just want to take this time to thank you both for holding this conversation around the issues. And we talked about a lot of different issues. We talked about decriminalization of cannabis. We talked about criminal justice reform. A lot of the problems that we have in this country, they can be divided up into two categories in my mind. And one of them is the moral fabric of our society, how we feel as a country collectively. The other thing is our institutional systems. Now, when it comes to how we move forward, there's plenty of ways that we can do it, but we have to address these in a comprehensive way. If it's dealing with the moral fabric of our hearts, moral fabric of our society, then yes, we all have a place. We all have to do more. We have to have conversations that are sometimes uncomfortable. We have to have conversations that challenge our spirits and hearts so that we can get to a place where we start to acknowledge that there are people that do not look like us that are having problems, and we need to be able to move forward with them as brothers and sisters. But when it comes to the institutional systems that are in place, and a lot of the problems that we spoke about have institutional implications and institutional systems that really hurt us from being able to move forward. When I speak about getting involved in the political process, it really takes political action to change the laws that have a direct impact on the communities that we live in. And that is why I inspire and I encourage people that are like-minded to not just talk about it, but more so be about it. Get involved in political action. And that looks a lot of different ways. It means supporting people who are like-minded. It means running for office. It means registering to vote, getting other peoples to vote, actually get out and vote. Every election cycle, we have people who sit on the sideline. And if they were to get off the sidelines and vote, we would have more people who think like us in positions of power so that we can actually change the laws to get the things that we need. Far too oftentimes, we have people representing our interests that don't understand where we come from, that don't have to deal with the struggles that we have to deal with, and they're making laws that hurt us. We can change that this election.
Very good. Sean, do you want to wrap it up for us?
Yeah, I feel like a Black preacher because I'm going to say I'm not going to keep you long, but I just all hearts and minds are clear while I get to my final point. I want to really piggyback on what Carlos Smith, my good friend, was saying, and that is here in Tampa, when I was in the legislature and we were starting to do the legal program, I can't tell you the amount of pushback, unexpected, I got from the Black community who came to me and said, why are you all doing all this thing for people to make money off something that has killed our community over the last 20, 25 years? And then when we had a dispensary open up in my district, there were damn near protests about that dispensary opening in the Black community because of the past disparities associated with marijuana and arrests and those sorts of things. And why were we allowing corporate America to go forward and make money without kind of fixing on the back end all the things that had gone wrong with regard to possession and people's records being messed up? It was I didn't expect that, but that's why you listen to people in your district. And there's a real, as Reggie said, there's a little bit of a stigma sometimes in our community because people, rightfully so, they're pissed about what has happened and want to make sure that they're included going forward and that what's behind us is fixed as well. And I want to also, I'm going to say 8 things about police brutality that you could do today if you wanted to. Ban chokeholds and strangleholds, require de-escalation, require warning before solution, exhaust all other means before shooting, have a duty to intervene, ban shooting at moving vehicles, require a use of force continuum, and require comprehensive reporting. If you wanted to, you could start doing those things today, and no amount of town halls and marches and vigils are going to change the fact that if your city's not doing some of those things, if your mayor's not interested in doing some of those things, if your city council's not interested in requiring the police chief to do some of those things, then you have a problem. So the policies are out there already. It's my opinion. We just need to, as the brother said, we need to take some action and get them done. So Dr. Berry, I'm happy to be on this panel. This was amazing.
Sean, if you can go ahead, the suggestions you just gave, if you could shoot that over to us, I would love to have that so we can blast it out on our Facebook page and have people start calling the mayor and the police and everyone else that they know and start.
It's the 8 can wait thing. I'll send it around.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And can I make one last point as well? We have, I believe now, 22 medical marijuana license holders in the state of Florida, and 0 that are African-American owned. There was a set-aside license that was set aside for a Pickford farmer. We need to demand that the governor open up the process and allow that license to be awarded. We know for a fact that minority businesses serve the minority communities differently than their white counterparts and businesses. When we see the healthcare disparities that have been highlighted by COVID-19, we need now more than ever representation in our healthcare infrastructure to make sure that those disparities are closed. So if we can, Carlos, that's something I'd love to be able to see how we can work on again. And again, I thank you for all that you've done. We put forth, asked for money from the state to do expungements and not just expungements, but wraparound services and so on. We have yet to get a committee hearing for some of the stuff we're doing, but we're going to keep fighting for it. So,
listen, Eric, we couldn't get a committee hearing for sickle cell disease as an added qualifying condition. Yeah. And as Kelly and I will both speak to, the doctors are going to continue to demand that we bring the best medical cannabis program, quality, safe, educated, legal access to the citizens of Florida until we take the next step. But my point is, I want to thank everybody so much. Listen, we're only 10 minutes over, and I'm thrilled for that. I thank you for accepting my invitation.
Increase the limits.
Right. And I appreciate everybody's cooperation and voice. Do count on me reaching back out for maybe another of these in a future time. And, believe me, everybody stay safe and healthy. But this has been fantastic and so gratifying.
Thank you all so much for taking the time. Really, it's so important. And we need to have discourse and we have to have discussion, even if it's more comfortable. It's the only way we're going to make change. So thank you all so much.
Ruta, I'm going to send over a list of support and donate or organizations that people can support and donate to. That you can also post, if you will.
Excellent. Yeah, we will. We'll put everything up. And again, thank you all for all that you do. And just be safe and healthy. And thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.